Hello YouTube. So the Riot API Bootcamp course has been a resounding success. I'm very proud of the work that many of y'all have shown me. It's super great to see so many people going from knowing nothing and having questions to building fully functioning apps. I wanted to make this video today to address a topic that one of my students had reached out to me about on itemization. So they had asked me what is the best item in League of Legends and how to interact with item data. So that's what I wanted to cover in this YouTube video today. As a reminder, the Riot API Bootcamp course is something I put together to take you from no knowledge on coding all the way up to building your own app. So let's say you were thinking about, oh, how do I get some data about my matches? This will tell you the code to do it, where to get help on it, as well as provide plenty of examples. So that's at riot-api-bootcamp.thinkific.com. This is the full syllabus. It's covered on GitHub. There's videos on my channel. There's plenty of information out there, but if you want to check it out again, that's at riot-api-bootcamp.thinkific.com. So let's get into today's content. What does the Riot API actually provide us? Information can be downloaded as a JSON file via the Riot API web portal. So that's what you're seeing on the image here on the right. The issue with this is it's not always the most accurate. The documentation Riot provides is not necessarily in line with the actual files you download. This has been a problem since the debut of the Riot API, but not only is the documentation they provide inaccurate, the actual format of the data changes constantly. So you have to account for that in your code. This is part of why there's a push for community projects like Merkai Analytics and Community Dragon. And another annoyance with the Riot API is assets are in different places. So if you wanted to get an image of what an item looks like, that's not in the same place as where you would get the information about that item. That's the data that we have available, and I want to step through what this actually looks like when you download it. This is what the file would look like. It's just a JSON, not super interesting, but it's not easy to work with, and like I mentioned before, Riot seems to change this a lot. Now we want some way of automating that data download, and we can do this using Python and specifically the Riot Watcher library, which is designed to interact with the Riot API. We'll be using the Data Dragon API endpoint. You can just Google Riot Watcher documentation, this will come up, but I'm going to step you through an example on how we can pull some item data. Jumping into the code, this is a Python editor, it's Spider, you've seen it in probably some of my other videos, but let's get into it. First up, we load Riot Watcher, specifically the LOL Watcher aspect, so this is telling us we want to look at League of Legends data, and then I have some information here that will allow me to import my API key. Before we make any calls to the API, we need to authenticate ourselves. And the way you do this is by putting in your API key on the web portal. If you just go to your dashboard, you can copy and paste it. But what I've done is put it in a file separate so I don't have to copy and paste it every single time. So that's what this is doing here. This is basically saying, all right, we now have some way of accessing the API. Now let's get the item data. First up, we need to say what region we're pulling the data from. As a heads up, for the data resources, you can't use EUN1, you have to change it to EUNE. This is part of the change Riot made earlier last year when they reworked the API, so just keep that in mind as you're going through this. First up, we want to make sure we get the latest version of the data. And we do this by asking the Riot API, specifically the Data Dragon endpoint, what is the current version there? So we're looking at items, so let's see, hey, what is the current version of items? And it looks like the most current item version is on patch 12.8.1, which is the current leak patch at the time of me making this video. We want the specific data for the items. If you download the JSON from Riot, it'll look something like this. And we can see here, basic doesn't tell us any information, type doesn't, version doesn't really matter. What we really want is the data aspect. So we're going to parse that out here and say, hey, the item list, give us just the data aspect. If we go back over to our raw data file, we can see that item number 1001 is boots, 1004 is fairy charm. So you need to know these going into it. There's ways you can restructure it to go by the name, but this is the convention that Riot uses. Let's look at the boots item. So this is tier 1 boots. This is the data we get back. So we have, they're called boots, it has some description. It tells us what it does, it tells us what it builds into, it tells us where to locate the image, as well as the buy and sell amounts and what it changes. Now let's say we want to go through all the items and find out what stats do they change. Looking at this specific data output, we can see we just go to the stats aspect of the item. Printing it out for the boots, as we see here, it gives us flat movement speed modification. So that's how to work with the item files in League of Legends. Hopefully this provides you with some insight on how to use the item data in the Riot API. It's not the easiest to work with, especially given that you have to look everything up by number, but the information is there. And that wraps up today's video. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on Discord or email, or you can check out my code on GitHub. But again, all of the basics for this information is covered in my Riot API Bootcamp course, so that's at riot-api-bootcamp at thinkific.com. Again, I put this together to help you guys, so if you have any questions, reach out and I'd be more than happy to help you step through the Riot API. I know it was a pain starting out on my end, and I don't want anyone else to go through that experience, so if you need any assistance, let me know. With that, I'm going to end the video here.